Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for that kind introduction. We're very happy to be here today, and we're very delighted to be invited to Krakow to talk to you all. I'm Mairead, and this is Michelle. And in particular, we're looking forward to talking with you about assessment today. I guess I can use... Okay. So our main goal of this keynote is to encourage you to start a conversation that will carry through the conference and beyond, hopefully, on assessment. We will ask you, as a result, to talk, chat, share actively with each other at various times during this session. So we are going to ask you to talk, so you're not going to be quiet for the full hour. So just be prepared for that at various times. As we started to plan this keynote, we became curious about when exactly assessment was introduced in higher education. So we took a look at it. And we were also wondering whether the purpose of assessment was the same originally when it was introduced and how it has evolved over time. And as it turns out, assessment has been around for a very long time, is what we discovered. The earliest mention of assessment we could find was all the way back in China during the Zhou dynasty, which is around 2200 BC. And assessment at this time was in the form of examination and was oral, an oral assessment. This approach to assessment continued right through the Han dynasty, where it was often used to select people for government service and roles of that kind. It eventually developed into a formal system of highly competitive examinations during the Song dynasty. And these examinations were used to recruit officials for state bureaucracy with an aim to having fair access to these roles. That was one of the points of bringing in this examination system. The exams emphasized rote learning at this time, which of course was an important ability for state officials of that kind. And interestingly, the system actually persisted until 1905 when it was finally abolished. So it lasted for a long time. During a similar time period in India, Nalanda University was formed and actually attracted many international students to it. And it was a well-respected center for higher learning. And assessment here was also predominantly oral, where students would present in their fields of science, mathematics, philosophy. But then, say, unlike the Chinese system that we looked at, they would then be challenged by their gurus in public debate. So this was an important feature of the examination or the assessment in Nalanda. So there was an emphasis on them being able to do more than rote learning, even back at this time. These are just two examples of very early forms of assessment, but it is interesting to see that assessment existed thousands of years ago in a way that's still very identifiable to us today. It's still very similar to what we think of as assessment today. If we turn to Europe, we see that assessment in the earliest universities was also often oral, of course, with written assessment beginning to come into play to complement oral examination, for instance, in ancient Greece. I suppose a connecting feature across countries and continents was that assessment provided a way of entering public service, government roles, and clerical religious roles in certain cases. So the ability to pass examinations was a way to elevate your social status and to enhance social mobility. And in some ways, you could say that examinations and assessment still serve the same purpose today, that's one of the things that they do. By the early 1900s, there was a move away from oral assessment, and assessment became predominantly written. And that was happening at the same time as there was an interest in standardization of assessment, that students would be assessed on the same content, in the same way, in the same setting, and written examination provided a way to do this. And interestingly, also around this time in the early 1900s is when multiple choice examinations first came into play. And they were also developed as a way to try to increase fairness, because you didn't have that subjectivity of maybe two people marking something differently. It was either the answer chosen or not. So it's kind of interesting that that's where they came from. What all of this shows us is that over a period of 4,000 years, there was really very few major changes to assessment. We moved from oral to written, and the idea of multiple choice was introduced, but really there's not a lot of change over that period. However, as we move towards the latter part of the 20th century, we do see a significant change in how assessment is viewed. Assessment becomes an area of scholarship and research at this time, which it really hadn't been before that. And there are now journals dedicated to assessment, conferences dedicated to assessment. It really is coming into an area of its own. One of the findings of this research on assessment is that assessment is often a driving force between what students will learn, and in some cases, what is taught. And we also see a much stronger emphasis on assessment as a driver for institutional change. So not just as a test of what an individual student is able to do, but thinking about it as a mechanism to inform quality processes, to look at student retention. Suddenly it's a much more institution-wide aspect that we're looking at. And between the 1960s and now, present day, scholarship on assessment has exploded. There's a lot out there. We now talk about assessment for learning, assessment for inclusion, assessment to improve student engagement, authentic assessment. There's a lot of different assessment out there. We may have become a little bit obsessed with assessment. And so not only do we now as lecturers have to consider the purpose of our assessment, we have all these other factors to consider as well. It's a much bigger task. So I think we can conclude that assessment is complicated, not an easy one. And Michelle and I have spent a lot of time thinking about how to work with academics on developing their approaches to assessment. And we often find that we need to discuss all the complicating factors there are when we consider assessment. So this quote here regarding medical education highlights some of those competing factors that our academic staff face. Assessment needs to be standardized, but it also needs to be authentic, right? It needs to be controlled, but it also needs to foster trust, right? These are not easy things to meld together. So it's a difficult topic for our lecturers to grapple with. And one way that Michelle and I approach this is to use scenarios. And we think the scenarios help people think through some of these complicating factors. So our first conversation today will be around such a scenario, where we're going to ask you to talk to each other about it, and a scenario that will highlight some of these competing factors. So for these scenarios, we will use VVox, hopefully. I know it's always a slight risk to introduce a tool in the middle of a talk, but hopefully it will work. So we will have this joining information up throughout as we're going through, but if you want to join now, you're welcome to. There aren't any polls open yet, but this is what we'll be using. You can either scan the QR code, or you can just go to vvox.app and enter that ID, and hopefully it will work for you. See people scanning the QR code. So we'll hope for the best. So we'll move on, and I'll talk through the first scenario, but the join information will be on the next few slides as well, so you don't have to worry if you've missed it now. So our first scenario, I'm gonna move down for this one, hopefully without falling over any steps. Our first scenario involves Maria. Okay, she's teaching a class of 120 students in a subject that has lots of connections to industry. And each year she makes sure there are external speakers from industry who come in and talk to her class and talk about how the content connects with their context. So right now, though, her faculty are revising their approach to assessment. So she's rethinking her final assessment for this class. And here is what she's considering. She's considering possibly doing an individual project where she's going to set the topic, provide the feedback, do all the marking, and the final submission will be a presentation. She's also considering maybe a group project where she'll also be the one providing the project, giving the feedback, marking, but the final submission in this one she's thinking would be a written report. She's considering a more traditional, maybe 2-hour written exam in an exam hall. She's also thought about involving her industry partners and creating a group project where the industry partner will be involved in providing the feedback and contributing to the final mark, and the final submission in that case would be an oral presentation with making sure there was questions for each group member at the end. She's thought about an individual oral assessment just over the content without a project being involved, or maybe even a final 2-hour multiple choice exam. Okay, so this is what she's considering. Lots of options on the table. Okay, she's not. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to talk to colleagues nearby about these options, okay? About the options in general, but in particular, if you were thinking about which was the most secure option, so which were students least likely to cheat on, okay? You're thinking about security, which one would you be choosing? Okay, and I'm only going to let you choose one, so you have to decide which one you would choose. If you were thinking security, you want the assessment to be secure. All right? Talk about them in general, and then I'll move on where you'll be able to enter your option in a minute, okay? But I'll give you a few minutes to start thinking about it first. So you should be able to enter your choice now on the Vivox poll. So you should be able to enter your choice. You chose already? Okay. You entered it? You've committed? Committed? Okay, good. I knew I could count on you, Paula. It's okay, you just hit it and it will send. You're one of the 21 who have committed. Well done. Okay, so I can see about half of you have entered. So I'll give you another, just a couple of seconds. We'll move on.
So our perspective was, from the teacher point of view,
yes.
Just to be sure about the quality of the knowledge.
To be sure that it's really the students' work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Let's see what we're saying. You can keep entering options, hopefully. It's if you can go to vivox.app and enter the code at the top.
I might be able to get it.
Yeah. So, okay, let's take a look. So what do we think? We don't agree, right? Okay. So most people were going for the individual oral assessment. Okay, 47%. Interesting, very good. Behind that is the group project with questions for each member at the end. Was the questions for each member at the end an important part of choosing that? Yes? Yes, more so than just a presentation? Feedback from them, yeah. But now you weren't meant to be choosing for your own time, Bola. You were meant to be choosing for security. Very good. And then some have chosen the final written exam, but less than I would have maybe thought for a secure option. Anybody want to comment on why you didn't choose the final written exam? Too much work? Okay. That's interesting. So, okay. The student can cheat on the written exam, but less so on the oral exam. Yes? Yeah, Christoph? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Okay, very good. All right. So now I'm gonna ask you to think about it again. Okay? But this time, we're gonna think about it in terms of what is fairest for the student. Okay? What do you think is fairest for the student? Now, I know you know all the options this time, so we're not going to spend much time on the options. So I'm going to open the poll, and this time I want you thinking about same question, but which is fairest for the student. Is everybody okay with, the options? You're good to? Yeah. So, which is fairest? Okay. Okay, a few more people to commit here. And we'll take a look. I'm gonna last 3, 2, 1. Oh, I might have to get you to click on from up there. Okay. So we can see we're still not agreeing, right? Now, an interesting point came up here, so I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind sharing. We had an interesting debate here during while you were choosing on what it means to be fairest for the students. What does that mean? Okay? So, do you mind if I? Would you like to start?
Okay. In my opinion, the fairest for the student means that for the same answer, I get the same amount of points or grade. So there is no subjectivity. Okay, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay, so no subjectivity, or is minimal subjectivity is what we're looking for. But now I'm going to ask.
Yeah, and for me to be fair is to organize an exam in such manner that each student may do the best what he can. So the condition of the room and that kind of stuff, at time and so on, so on.
And you made the point that because we've lots of different students, we might need flexibility or the ability to account for that. So that's a different perspective on fairness. Anybody else have? Okay, so the challenge to different students should be roughly at a similar level. So we want to make sure that students are challenged at the same level across the board. That would be our definition of fairness. Anybody else have a different? Yeah.
I was just wondering that it should also take into consideration different forms, right? Some students are not able able to speak in public,
Mhm.
present in public, or they completely, they become completely blocked.
Yep.
Right, so that's
So it might be that the mode, as you said, yep, that if we can allow some choice perhaps in the mode, that might be fairest, which I didn't give you an opportunity for up here necessarily, right? Didn't give you an opportunity for choice. Anybody else have anything that came up as they were discussing they want to share?
having the second opinion,
The second opinion.
right? Like, why should the lecturer be the only person?
Okay. So in that case, you were going to the industry partner option. Anybody else feel that the industry partner, because there was another opinion, that was fair? Okay. Yep.
Projects are the fair because the students learn how to work in the groups, because in the industry, in the future work outside the university, they must they were working in the groups as to make a bullet or something else, and they must learn at the university how to work in the group and based on the industry.
So that's interesting. So thinking about fairest as in what's fairest to students to prepare them for life after university, in some sense putting them in this situation is fairest because it represents what they will have to do afterwards.
Some students are shy, the other are brave, and there are group of
Yep. So they get to they're as a collected group. Okay. So I've one last one. I promise we're almost done with Maria. We've one last one. You can just skip on to most time efficient for the lecturer. I feel some of you have already been thinking about this despite the fact that you weren't told to. But if you were choosing most time efficient for the lecturer, which one are you going to choose? That's a countdown, okay. Yeah, we'll be fine. Okay. That's gonna give me vertigo. Okay. 3, 2, 1. We're gonna move. That's remarkably efficient when I do the countdown. You really commit at that point. Ah. I wonder if let's see, what do we have? 36 point something % who didn't choose a final multiple choice exam. I wonder if you've ever tried to scan bubble sheets. I have a feeling maybe that I could be a role in that. And we're so definitely moving towards the multiple choice exam. You agree on that one for the most part. Not everybody, but there's a lot that are looking at that. Okay, so Michelle chose this photo. I can't take credit for this photo. So from what we were discussing there, I think we can see that depending on which priority we're looking at, we're choosing different assessments, right? But in reality, we have to consider all of those priorities at the same time, right? We don't get the luxury of choosing one assessment to emphasize one thing or another assessment to emphasize another thing. So they're not easy decisions that we have to make. And, we were kind of chuckling at the last one, choosing the multiple choice exam. But that's the reality. We all have a ton of competing factors on our time, and we do have to consider what we can reasonably manage to do for our students. So it is a significant consideration when we're making decisions about assessment. So it's worth remembering, though, that the landscape of assessment is not just difficult for us. It's not just hard for us. It's also hard for students. It can be really tricky for students to figure out what we want, what they're meant to do, and just to navigate it. So let's take a look at a scenario, and we're not going to use VVox on this one, but it's one that we have used with both staff and students before. And it's a draw the line scenario that comes from a handbook for deterring plagiarism in higher education that's been around for almost 20 years now. And it's one where we show you a task from a lecturer, and we walk you through a series of actions that a group of students have taken. And we want you to decide where the students have moved from good academic practice and collaboration and lots of good things that you might want them to be doing over into doing something they shouldn't have been doing, into academic misconduct. Okay, so that's what you're looking at the scenario, thinking about. So a teacher has set the following assignment for their class. Choose one of the 3 companies suggested and write an individual report on the chosen company's IT issues in the last 3 years. And so then you have a group of students discuss the coursework brief with the teacher and with other students. That's their first step. They look at examples from the past, and they look for good things about them, bad things about them, and they discuss it with each other. Then, step 3, they discuss the best way to tackle the task of writing the report, and they all decide to choose the same company. Let's do Microsoft. They all decide to do a bit of research on the IT issues in the organization. So you do security, I'll do legislation. They divide it up. And they tell each other what they found and brief each other on the useful sources of information they found. Yep. It just doesn't like you. Then step 6, they delegate the best researcher from the group to find out about the company's issues, tell the others and give them copies of notes, web pages, summaries of articles. So Joe, you go do all of this. They jointly agree on a structure for the final report. They agree on which are the strongest points, which should go first, etc. Then at step 8, they share out the writing tasks. So each person writes a section or 2 of this. And then they pull the sections together. Everyone takes the task and they go off and they change it slightly, but no more than by 5%. Not a lot. And then they submit the report for marks. Okay? So we've gone through these 10 steps. So I'm going to give you just a minute to think by yourself or with somebody next to you where you think it's all gone wrong. And it's worth thinking by yourself, just even for 10 seconds first. Where are you choosing? What do you think? Where have they stepped into academic misconduct, if they have at all? Okay? Where do you think they've gone where they're not doing something you would want them to do anymore? Okay? Feel free to talk to each other briefly. That's right. So we've used this scenario a good bit with groups of academics, and we've also done it with groups of students. And so we have had conversations with both. And I'm going to show you. It's okay, I got it. So here's a sample of an answer that we have from a group of academics, a group of lecturers. We did that. And this is just one sample set of answers, but it's what we typically see with this scenario. And I don't know if it's what you found as you've been talking to each other out there, but people disagree. That's the major finding from this. It's not where they draw the line, okay? But people disagree. Lecturers disagree. Lecturers who care a great deal about teaching and learning and who give an awful lot of thought to their assessments and how they do things, they disagree on what's okay and what's not okay. And that is understandable. People come from different disciplines. They come from different disciplinary norms. Different things are acceptable. They come from different places. There's lots of reasons why there's differences between people on this. But if you think about it from the student perspective, if we don't even agree on what's okay or what's not okay, it's very hard for them. They might have 5, 6 teachers in one semester, lots of different assessments. what if everybody has a different expectation of what's okay or what's not okay? How are they meant to really figure out what they're meant to be doing on different assignments? So we asked a group of students, same question. And that's what they thought. We always are slightly concerned about the student who thought it was academic misconduct to discuss the coursework brief with the teacher and with other students. We feel they must have been burned at some point in the past. They must have had a bad experience. But it's not that different. They're also unsure, right? They do, most of them pick that kind of stage 6 where the writing gets delegated out. They mostly feel that's where it's gone wrong. But they also aren't sure. And that's really the major point that we like to make with this scenario, is that it's really important to talk to your students and to each other about what you're telling them with regards to assessment. Now I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
Oh yes, great. So I think we can safely conclude that assessment is hard. It's hard from the staff perspective, and it's hard from the student's perspective. So we're constantly trying to adapt and adjust our assessments to meet the challenges that come our way, and then all the other requirements that can be put in place, such as accreditation requirements, local policies and procedures around what assessment should look like. Should the assessment be high stakes? Should it be low stakes? And what should the ratio between those be? And we can end up then over time that we have assessment, after tweaking it to adapt it to try and kind of serve the different purposes and requirements, looks a little bit like this lovely house here. Bits have been tweaked and added to over the years, enhanced, but maybe not now serving its true purpose, or not doing so efficiently. We end up with an assessment or an assessment schedule that has really become quite unwieldy, and we can't quite figure out how to deal with that or improve it despite our best efforts. We've read the papers. There's lots of papers out there, we know that. We've listened to our students, we've followed the rules that are put in place. We've added in smaller continuous assessments with marks to encourage them to actually do them. And then more formative assessments so that students are getting feedback and can learn. And then we're told we're over-assessing. So on the one hand, we need to do more, and on the other hand, we need to do less. So what do we do? What do we do when we're faced with all of these competing and complicated requirements of assessment? Well, we've found with our own academics in Galway that it can be really helpful to just take a step back, or even a few steps back from assessment, and try to take a broader view of what's happening across a module or a course, and think, well, what was the reason for this assessment in the first place? Is this assessment to certify learning? Is it assessment of learning? Is it to encourage learning? Assessment for learning, you know, to encourage students to engage and to learn as they go. Is it assessment that is designed to engage students in self-appraisal so that they start to find those checkpoints and work out where they are in their learning, sometimes referred to as assessment as learning? And what do I really want or need to know with respect to my students' learning? Because assessment doesn't always tell us what we want it to tell us. By trying to make it more fair or more secure, we can sometimes lose sight of what the assessment was supposed to tell us. So returning to the purpose of assessment, looking across the module of each assessment piece can really be quite helpful. Now I know it can be hard sometimes to find the time to do that. And in Ireland, certainly, I don't know about here, there can persist a narrative that unless there are marks for something, students won't do it. So then we start assigning marks for homework. Now one way that we have found is that if we encourage our academics to get down into the room, even a room like this, and let them work on the problems in the class where they can make the mistakes, they can break through those threshold concepts, and find their way with the lecturer, guiding and supporting, it can help. And then feedback, we know we should be providing feedback on their learning to give that formative piece, and that it's really good pedagogic practice to do so. Well, how do we do that without returning to our kind of crazy house situation? Well, again, maybe you provide the questions in class, you provide them with the feedback as you walk around, as Mairead was doing here today, or you encourage office hours or mid-semester meetings, or maybe students do a number of pieces of work over the semester and they pick one that you give feedback on. Can these informal feedback opportunities allow you to then simplify your assessment? And then we also need to check that we're seeing the assessment from the viewpoint of the student. Is the assessment that we've designed the same as the assessment that students are experiencing? Do you want to assess the end product, or do you want to assess the process that the students took to get there? Will you know what process your students took? Do they understand what's expected of them? And do they know why you're giving them this assessment? Are they themselves aware that there are different purposes of assessment, and is it worth actually sharing that with them, and what the purpose, of this particular assessment is? Is it worth sharing this with them? So what should this assessment piece be giving them an opportunity to demonstrate to you? The other question is, do students truly understand how assignments build on each other and work together? So are they using the feedback that you give them to feed into the next piece? And if they're not, is it that they actually, sometimes we hear that they don't know where to find the feedback, or is it that they actually don't know how to usefully apply it to their learning? I've asked a lot of questions. I realise that. So why don't we have another look at, or a look at a different scenario. And again, I'm not going to use VVox for this one. But we'll take a break from the questions for a minute. So this is an example of a scenario that we have used, again, both with staff and with students. And it's one that can be useful to check and see if students are on the same page with respect to what to do when something maybe goes wrong in group work. So we have 4 students here, and they have left it a little bit late to start their project. So they just have 1 day left, and 3 of the students arrive at the correct time, Diarmuid, Aoife and Sahas, but there's no sign of Bethany. Diarmuid, he just wants to get going. He says, let's assign the roles to the 3 of us that are here: writer, researcher, presenter for the project. Aoife thinks, oh no, we should wait for Bethany. We should wait for Bethany to come. Bethany finally sends a message, and she needs to have emergency surgery. And she won't be able to do any of the work on the project. So she asked the others to do the work and just include her name on the project. So I think we have time for you to take maybe a minute to have a think about it, have a chat.
And one of the things we ask students to think about for this one is, what would you do if you found yourself in that situation?
Yeah.
Like at this point, you have somebody, they've asked you to put their name down on work that they've not contributed to at all. They're asking you to go ahead and do the project. It's meant to be a group project. What would you do? What would you do at this stage? And you might think back to whether you've ever had a group project where you've had a group that might have run into such a situation.
Okay, so as I said, we have run this with students. And this is what a group of students responded with. So these students were not happy with Bethany. They doubted she was even in the hospital. But they also highlighted a lot of things that could have helped the students avoid this kind of situation occurring. So better communication amongst the group, better timekeeping. So it does show us that students, they are aware of the issues, you know, that come up, and I'm sure you've seen these kinds of issues come up at time, you know, in the past. But we find it can be really, really helpful to use these kinds of scenarios with students in advance of giving them an assessment piece, or giving them an assessment piece and then running a scenario like this. It's much easier sometimes to be objective and think about what the other students are doing and have an opinion on it when it's not you that's stuck in the situation. When you're stuck in a situation, you panic and you may not always make the best decisions. So by running these kinds of scenarios with students, it can help them, and they have fed back to us that they feel better prepared for a situation as it might arise in the future. And they might be better, they might make better choices then if they do come up against a problem. Okay, so we've kind of looked at a lot of things, and we've thrown out a load of questions, and we know there's loads of challenges, but at the end of the day we do need to think about the practicalities. So we do need to think about the time that students and ourselves are spending on assessment. Is it in some cases just busy time? Are we formally assessing students on particular topics or concepts more often than necessary? Do they only need to show us once that they can demonstrate a learning outcome? Is it possible to shorten the assessment and still discover whether your students are learning what you want them to learn? Can you change the format of the assessment? Or would that help you or your students? Or are there ways that we can come together to assess? So for example, designing assessments across modules or programs. Assessments that can actually help students synthesize their learning a little bit, and join the dots across their learning, which sometimes we find, you know, they may not be doing as well as they could. And interestingly, even though a lot of our approaches to teaching and our module design and our learning outcomes, they vary significantly across the disciplines. We know that. But our assessment methods really don't to the same degree. And we have to wonder, why is that? So are there possibilities for assessment that we just have not considered? Is there something completely different that we could try? No, this, oh, no, thought I was going to another scenario, but I'm not. Not yet. There is the elephant in the room. What do we do about generative AI? We see headlines weekly on whether we should or should not be using generative AI in higher education. So should we be using it because our students are definitely going to need it when they go out into the world of work? Should we definitely not be using it because it's destroying critical thinking? Is it freeing up time for students to engage in more critical thinking? Or is it what we hear of as cognitive offloading? And is that okay? Are there ways in which generative AI can actually help or is good for student learning? I don't think any of us have definitive answers to any of these questions, but now we're going to consider another scenario, and we will be using Vvox for this again. So you can join again if you've dropped out. And I'll just read through this quickly. So we have Shane, and Shane was working on an assignment, but he was really struggling to just get started on it. And he was chatting to his mother, and she said, well, why don't you use ChatGPT to just give you some ideas? And he said, no way, I would definitely get in trouble for doing that. I'm not doing that. And his mother said, wow, that's, you know, I read in the newspaper that like 92% of university students are already using generative AI or ChatGPT to help them with their university work. And Shane said, yeah, they probably are, but I'm not taking any risks. So he turned in his assignment and he got a D for it. So this is our grading. I don't know if it corresponds to your grading, but a D isn't good. And the class average was a B, which is better. So I'm going to put up some tasks, and I want you to choose which of those tasks in your context it would have been okay for Shane to use Gen AI. So Shane is one of your students. For which of these things would it have been okay to use Gen AI? Do talk to each other, have a little argument. We're happy with that. Yeah. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds.
Argue quickly. And for this one, you do have to hit submit after you've chosen all the options you want.
I'm going to give you a 10-second extension.
Generous.
Okay, if you have a few choices there, just press submit and we'll have a look. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, a half. Okay. Okay. So, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that we think using Gen AI for some things is okay, and some of us think that using Gen AI for other things is not okay. And that's, I mean, that's what we'd expect, right? But the question is, do our students know for what it's okay to use Gen AI? Potentially not. And if they're in your class today and in a different class tomorrow, and you have different opinions on what it's okay to use Gen AI for, that's going to be confusing for the students. If you don't tell them. If you tell them, that's fine.
And again, it's something that you can use a scenario
Yeah.
to talk to your students about before an assignment.
Yeah.
You know, and again, sometimes it's just easier for them and for you to talk about an imaginary situation, because often they feel if they admit they're going to use it for something and then you say that's not okay, by asking you the question, they've implied that they're going to be cheating and that you look at them differently as a result. So it's worth kind of considering talking about the imaginary people.
Yeah. You know, the news headlines tell us that almost all students are using Gen AI, but they're not all using Gen AI. And we don't know that they're using it for the same tasks in the same way. We don't know if they're using the same tools. We don't know if some are paying for tools and some are not paying for tools. So we really do need to talk to our students about whether they're using Gen AI, how they're using Gen AI, and then they need to know what it's okay to do with respect to each assessment in each class at any kind of particular time. Okay, so we're going to take a little look at Philip, Greta and Jan, and we'll use Vivox for this one again. So these students were in a class and they were given a written assignment, and there were no instructions provided. So they approached the assignment in different ways. So Philip, he found it hard to get started. So he decided to use ChatGPT to brainstorm on the topic. He had a look at the output it gave him, and then he began the assignment just using that as a starting point. Greta, she feels more comfortable writing in Swedish. So she completed the assignment in Swedish, and then she used a translation tool to translate it into English. She read through it, changed the wording slightly, submitted it. And then we have Jan. Jan struggles with writing. He has lots of really good ideas for the assignment, and he knows what he wants to say, but it just never seems to come out well when he starts to write. So he makes notes of his ideas, and then he asks ChatGPT to answer the prompt using the bulleted ideas that he provides. ChatGPT provided a response that incorporated most of them, but did miss a few, and the argument didn't sound quite the way he thought it should. So he made some changes so that the response reflected what he intended, and he submitted it. So I want you to have a look at those, chat with your neighbour, think about if any of these students, in your opinion, in your course, have committed academic misconduct. Is this, for any of the students, would that be wrong, in your opinion? I'm going to let you have a look at them for a little bit longer before I open the poll.
And do chat to each other about it.
Okay, I'm going to open the poll now. So who do you think was engaged in academic misconduct?
So who do you think was cheating? Who do you think was doing something they shouldn't have been doing?
Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. So quick fingers if you want to get your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay. So a lot of you thought it was okay, but a couple of you chose different people, and I'm sure you have different reasons. And we often find this again with these scenarios. What we often find interesting is that, and again, it can come down to what the purpose of your assessment is. So Jan had all the ideas. He had all the ideas. He knows what it is he wants to say. He's just not very good at getting it down on paper. But he was the one that was more likely to end up in trouble. Whereas Philip has no ideas. None. Has he learned anything at all? But he's able to write the ideas. So again, so I'm being quite harsh there, but if we really think about it, that's kind of what these are saying. So this is why it's really, really important to think about what the purpose of your assessment is.
And that's what we see all the time.
Yeah.
So all the time, more people think Jan has engaged in academic misconduct than Philip. That's persistent throughout every group that we run this with. And it is worth thinking about how we're thinking about these tools and what we want our students to be doing. And as Michelle said, it is really dependent on what your disciplinary context is, right? And thinking about that, thinking about what this assessment is meant to be checking. Is it really meant to be checking how well the students can write? In some cases, yes, I'm sure it is. And that's important to know. But maybe it's not. And maybe we've just gone into kind of a default of thinking that good student writing is a proxy for student understanding, and making sure that we're not maybe making that mistake if that's not what we want to be assessing.
Yeah. So we've showed you a lot of scenarios today, and as Mairead mentioned earlier, we use these types of scenarios a lot in our work with our academics and occasionally with student groups. And we find them a really, really good way to encourage conversation on what can be quite difficult and complex problems or topics. And we often encourage our academics to use scenarios with their own students and we share our materials openly and freely. So anything we've used today, you're very welcome to have it. We can share it via the conference organisers. If you'd like to read a little bit more, there's a paper we published which was looking in particular around academic integrity problems, similar to one or two that we have looked at today. So hopefully you agree with us that from today that conversation is really important. We can see that we don't all agree when it comes to important decisions around assessment. And they are important because they are a huge part. Assessment is a huge part of education. So our parting message to you really is to please continue the conversation that you have started in this room with each other. Go through the rest of the conference, talk to each other about some of the scenarios, keep talking, other things that come up, and take that step back from the kind of the complicated and hard place that assessment can sit, and talk about what you'd really like to do with assessment. And when you go back to your faculties, please talk to your students. Talk to them about the purpose of assessment, not education, purpose of assessment. Talk to them about how they might handle difficult situations. Feel free to use scenarios, some we've used, make up your own. Because we really do find that they open up conversation in just a slightly different way. Thanks.